Flow can make it easy to bring in data from multiple operational and enterprise level data sources, and then combine that data, add context, and turn it into meaningful information. Let's use this video series to understand exactly how to do it in Flow. My goal is that you could use these videos for a step-by-step guide as you're learning to use the system, as well as just to understand the potential of the system. All right, let's get started. This is the Flow config tool. I want you to understand how it's laid out so that you can then use it accordingly. We have two different sets of menus, a series of left menus and a series of right menus. There are tabs for each of these menus. And we're going to use a series of the tabs in order to connect to our data sources, build our measures, and so on. So let's start there with connecting to the data source. I have the concept of data sources, things I gather data from, and also data consumers, things I push data to. If we right-click on data sources and then go to New, we'll get a list of all of the different types of data sources that Flow supports. Historians, SQL databases, real-time data sources, web API, manual data entry, all the common structures that Flow pulls data from. I'm going to connect to a Canary historian. I'm local to my Canary instance, so I'll keep it local. If I was going across the web, or if I wanted to enable security, I have those settings available to me. Flow also comes with a historian simulator. And I also have the capability to grab real-time data. In this case, I'll do it from an MQTT buffer. I'm using the Hive MQ Cloud version for this. Secure, port 8883. Important to note that when we connect to a real-time data source, we need history in order to create analytics. It's not just a matter of knowing what the now value is. We have to have a sense of what the value has been. So when we connect to a historian, we rely on the history in the historian for that. We just pull it when we need it. When we connect to a SQL database or a transactional table, again, the history's already there, we pull it. But when we connect to an MQTT broker, an OPC UA server, a Kafka stream, Telegraph, it's a real-time source. So for those, we need to actually create a buffer of raw values so that we have it to use in our analytics. And that's exactly what we do. We want you to specify the specific group ID on the MQTT broker. So in this case, I'm using Sparkplug. The SPBV 1.0 is already implied. And so now my next level is what is the group ID. I'm doing group ID Austin, and then I'm wildcarding the edge node and everything below that. So that means if there is any tags inside of the group ID Austin, Flow is going to automatically start to buffer that data and store it for me to be able to then use any of the tags that are on that broker. Okay, so if I expand my data source, I've created 3 data sources. I need to now link them to my Flow system. I know that because of the red disk beside each server. And if I hover over, it'll tell me that it's not assigned to my platform. Left menu, bottom, gear, deployment icon. This is my platform. It's my machine name. And currently there's no data sources here. Now, if you have not followed the installation and configuration videos as part of the Flow Masterclass, I encourage you to do that. You will find that in order for this to work, you have to deploy these engines and right-click, deploy the platform. So it's just a matter of right-click, deploy, and then deploying this. I need to drag each of these across. I'll drop the first one on the platform, and that'll automatically create the data sources section for me. And there's Canary. I'll bring over the simulator, do the same thing, and the MQTT buffer, and do the same thing. Then it's just a matter of right-click and deploy. Those are now deployed. That means now that they're deployed, I can browse the namespaces. I do that by clicking on the data source, and then in the namespace field, I get the namespace. So if we look at our simulator, we've simulated a juice factory. We have a packaging area, utilities, a system, and a syrup preparation area. Inside of packaging, I have 2 fillers, and inside of the fillers, I'm following a pretty standard naming convention. But notice I have 2 fillers inside of this packaging line. So for this factory, it so happens we do have a 3rd filler, but it's not using the simulator, it's using a Canary historian. So we have replicated that naming convention or structure in our juice factory for filler 3. F03 designation, as well as mixer 4, and then a utility section. The purpose in this is we want to demonstrate that as we start to run our measures, build calculations, cleanse data, the purpose of having all of these different data sources, the need in an operation with all of their different data sources is to be able to bring tags or data points from each of these different sources and mix it together. And that's what Flow's really good at, and I want to make sure that we have multiple sources so that we can demonstrate that in these videos. All right, before we start actually running calculations, one more step to do. So I click on my toolbox icon, and I'm able to look at my calendars. Notice I already have a production calendar. That production calendar has been in effect since 2018, January the 1st. It has a shift pattern established, Monday through Sunday, running 3 shifts a day. I could create various shift patterns so that if I had seasonality, I could account for that. I could create a new shift pattern if it changes, and that would start maybe next Monday. Also inside of the production calendar, if I double click on production, this is where I would have designated on a new calendar what is the start of my week, what day and time does my week start on, and then subsequently what time does each day start on. And then if I run a minute KPI, what type of minute bucket do I want to create? In this case, we don't need anything faster than 5 minutes, so 5 minutes is my bucket. Now I can run multiple calendars, so if I wanted to create a new calendar, I could do that. But for the sake of simplicity right now, we're just going to use one calendar. Okay, last thing to cover. As I look at my model has a folder in it. I've called this the How-To series. Inside of this, we're going to drag another folder, and we'll call this the Juice Factory. Inside of the Juice Factory, we have already established by looking at our simulator that I have packaging, syrup prep, systems, and utilities. I have multiple fillers. I'm just going to mirror a little bit of this. We'll do packaging, filler 1, and I'll stop there for now. All right, the next piece of the flow zone is going to be a metric. A metric is simply a definition of what we want to measure. I'm going to assign a metric to filler, not filler 1, to, let's call this metric production. Inside of production, I can bring over the data that's in the historian and represent it as a tag inside of Flow. That's my tag icon. Now, before I do that, I'm going to make it easy on myself. I'm going to come up to this top menu bar. If you don't have a top menu bar here, it might be because you've closed it. You can come to View and click Defaults, and that'll come back. This top menu bar allows me to go ahead and set the defaults for my tags and my measures so that as I'm creating them, I don't have to constantly change my desire for kind of those standard features. So in my tag, what do I want my format to look like? I don't have any pre-selected, so I'll enter it. I'd like to use 2 decimal points. What is my unit of measure? I'll go ahead and leave that blank. I'm going to inherit the unit of measure that's been already established in the historian. And how far back do I want to backfill? I don't need to backfill the whole way to July 15th as my standard. Instead, I'm going to just choose to backfill today's the 4th to the 1st of August as my standard. I can change this case by case if I needed to. I'm ready to create my first tag inside of Flow. Now, I created folders by dragging folders over, by dragging a metric over. I could also drag a tag over and drop it into the tree, but that's going to require me to do a little extra work. So I'm going to show you a faster way to do that. Let's take this defaults bar and set it to tag. That means that anytime I drag something from this side, I'll take bottle count and drop it on the metric, it will default a tag using the naming convention as established and using my default values. Double-clicking on the measure, or in this case the tag, opens that for configuration in the middle space. Each of these are expandable headers. I can see that my retrieval is linked to my data source flow simulator. There's the tag path. My data preview is currently blank. Here is my start and end date, and I can just click on refresh to ask it to replicate, or to ask it to go to the data source, retrieve the raw data, and display it for me. So this can be edited. If I wanted to go back to the 3rd and hit refresh, it's now going to show me the data from the 3rd. I also have the capability to take this date and just make it the now time using the blue refresh now. Flow's really good about giving me tooltips, so when in doubt, just hover over. I can expand and break this out to full window. And this also allows me to then, inside of this window, look at other tags and data. So if I wanted to also look at the reject count, I could drop it below. It'll use the same time period and set its own scaling, or I could drop it on top. Scales are different, therefore the data is hard to see the actual resolution. Right-clicking on any of this gives me the menu, and I can do things like change the layering, change the style, the format, the width, and so on. All right, you might have noticed that I've had a couple of windows open up on top of each other. The window feature here at the top allows me to see all of the current open windows, and I can toggle back and forth using that. I can also choose to close all of them, which I'll do. Okay, so I now have this concept of a tag inside of Flow. I'm going to do the exact same thing with my reject count. Drag it, drop it on the metric, and I get the rejects automatically formatted. Now I am going to clean up the name just a little bit. I don't want the FL001 because in my structure I already have that. Filler 1 has already been represented. Flow will use the naming convention in your tree up, starting at the metric, and then follow it down using a dot to represent branch structure. So let's go ahead and change this. I think I left my dot on there. Perfect. So I have a default unit of measure of bottles, and I have both my count and my reject. If I wanted to change this unit of measure, double click on it. I can change it for this particular tag. Maybe it's cases. And maybe this is actual bottles. I'll go ahead and bring this back to bottles, and you'll see as soon as I do that and tab out, it updates. All right. Before I start to build KPIs or measures, I'd like to address this calculation capability. So inside of production, I have two tags. I have both total and bad. Let's go ahead and calculate good. All I have to do is select my tag, drag it to the flow zone, drop it on top of the calculation. And this will be bottle count good. If I double click on good and expand retrieval, you'll now notice that I have my tag for bottle count listed and an expression window. I'm going to bring in the reject, drop it right on top of the calendar date. So this is basically allowing me now to use both of these tags inside of this expression. So total minus reject will equal good. I need to verify or validate my expression. Click the blue checkbox, and then I can refresh the data. And what I have, it's going to be hard to see in this small window, but what I'll have now is my good count. All right, so I can close that. And now I have 3 different tags to start working with. So if I want to understand my total production per hour, look to my flow zone, find the hourly measure. There it is. It's got the 1 hour slice of time designated. And just drag and drop onto the hour. I immediately get a new measure with the hourly icon. I'm going to give it the correct name. We'll call it hourly. And it's nested under bottle count. So when I open this, look at the heading, production, that is my metric, dot bottle count, and then nested underneath dot hourly. A nice clear tag path, or a nice clear path to the measure, I should say. All right, again, I'm going to look at retrieval. Retrieval is going to show me the aggregation method that's being used to calculate this every hour. Now, this is a totalizer tag. I don't want to take the average of this totalizer tag. Instead, I'd like to understand what is the counter of this totalizer tag. And the counter is simply going to say from the beginning of the period to the end of the period, what has been the delta. If the counter, if the totalizer resets, the counter aggregation understands that reset and does the math, including the reset, so that it gives me the proper delta for that hour. This will backfill to the 1st of August, as was my default. The only thing left for me to do is to deploy this calculation. I know it hasn't been deployed because there's a green deploy icon still showing in the top corner, as well as look over here in the model, I've got this green disk beside the hourly measure, and that runs the whole way up my tree. That tells me when I see a green disk that I have something that has yet to be deployed. I can deploy it here from the measure itself, but if this was completely collapsed, I could also, without having to open it up and hunt for the measure that needs deployed, I could also right-click and deploy from here. So I can deploy from here, I can deploy from here. One other thing just to note, every time I create a new tag or a new measure, there's a unique identifier that is present for that tag or that measure. This is nice because later on when we talk about the API, I have a way to reference this exact piece of data without having to worry about the path to it. I can just use the ID. All right, this is now running and deployed. Let's take this hourly and let's get a sense of what is our shiftly number. All I need to do is take the hourly, drag it over to the shiftly measure, and release, and now I have shiftly. I want this to be flattened because I don't want my name to be bottlecount.hourly.shiftly. So I'll just drop this on top of bottle count, and now it's bottlecount.hourly, bottlecount.shiftly. What if I wanted to get a shift to date? Since the beginning of the shift, based on our shift calendar, what have we made shift to date? All I do is drop hourly back on top of itself, and this is going to give me shift to date. At the exact same time, if I wanted to get a day to date, hourly, back onto itself, now it already has given me shift to date, now it's going to give me day to date. Same thing, I'm just going to drop these here. And then green disk says I haven't deployed them. I'll just deploy it from here. One thing to note. What did I have when I had this hourly? I was doing a counter tag, right? So with that counter tag, I've established now that I'm looking for the difference between the beginning of the period and the end of the period based on the bottle count tag. What do I have on the day to day? Let's take a look at it. Notice that the day to day has been smart enough to take the aggregation method that was counter on the hourly and change it to a sum. So what's happening is this hourly, which is what it's linked to, is now being summed daily every time that there is an hourly update or change. Same way for the shift, and same, let's take a look at the shiftly KPI. Look at the retrieval on this, same thing. So what Flow does is it takes the smallest time slice, or the measure with the smallest time period. As it gets calculated, in this case hourly, every hour, Flow is going to output that new measurement into the Flow database. So at the end of the hour, my current system time is 7:43 in the morning. At 8 a.m., Flow will go request all of the raw data that this tag is associated with. This tag is associated with this data source. Flow will hit this data source, ask for the last hour of raw information. It'll calculate using the aggregate and output and store the hourly measure in the Flow database. Then it'll run the day-to-day, shift-to-day, shiftly, and any other measures we build off of this number off of this building block. So I will not hit the historian again and again and again. I will only hit the historian once an hour asking for this data. Flow will then use this data to calculate all of the corresponding dependent measures. If I look at the hourly measure and look at the dependents, I can see my aggregated measures that are dependent upon this measure. If I undeploy this measure, notice that these three measures, which are dependent, as well as the calculation, which is dependent, are now all in a false state. The second that I redeploy, everything returns to good state. All right, this has been, I hope, a helpful short training exercise for you. I would encourage you in your system to connect to a data source, bring over a tag, preferably like a totalizer, and try to do the exact same thing. You should be able to use what we've done here step by step. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. You can do so at support@flow-software.com. Thanks.